everybody, Jennifer Schaus here. We're coming to you live today from Washington, D.C., and thanks for joining us in our 2024 webinar series. We're covering the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations. We're covering this series on Wednesdays and Fridays at noon Eastern. All of our webinars are complimentary and they're recorded, so you can find them on our YouTube channel, and you can find the slides over on slideshare.net. Slideshare.net, you can log in. It's a complimentary site. You can log in with your LinkedIn credentials and download any of our 600 plus PowerPoints from any of our webinars in the past. In order to sign up for the series, or if you're looking for any of the recordings, you can just navigate over to our website, go to the section called the FAR, like you see on your screen here, and these are all listed by just sequentially the FAR part number, which is again how we are going through the series. Unfortunately, there's no bulk registration, so you have to sign up individually for each one. And again, the recordings will be listed there as well. If you're anxious to get to a FAR part that we have yet to cover, just make a note that we did cover the FAR in 2020. So it was 4 years ago. So some of the information might be outdated as these regulations have changed over the years. So just keep a note, make a note that those are there, but somewhat dated. A quick blurb about us: we do provide consulting services for established government contractors. This ranges from market analysis reports to contract vehicles, including FedLink, GSA schedules, VA schedules, and more. Some of the other services that we provide are listed on our website under the About Us section. In the event that you're selling to federal government contractors, we offer advertising in our newsletter and webinar series, as well as event sponsorship and more. If you're interested in getting pricing as well as options, send us an email and ask for our media kit. I've got a topic coming up, or a webinar, coming up with our friends at the Western Michigan Apex Accelerator. I'm going to be presenting on GSA schedules. It's complimentary. If you want to register, go over to our website. It's listed under the event section, even though this is a webinar. Again, it's complimentary. It's Thursday, March 28th, as you can see, from 11 to 12 Eastern. If you're looking for help with THS PAC or NASA SOUP, drop us an email. Another webinar that's coming up on Tuesday, March 26th, with our friends at MyGovWatch. They conducted a survey of contracting officers to really understand what contracting officers were thinking as they were posting and putting out RFPs. So they've got some interesting data to share. It should be a pretty lively and fun webinar. Again, that's Tuesday, March 26th. You can find that on our website, again, under events, even though this is a webinar and it is complimentary. Our speaker today is Carrie Palmentier, and she is going to be back with us in June, 2 Thursdays, kind of back to back, the 20th and 27th, covering SBIRs. These are also complimentary webinars, and they are on our website under the event section. And again, yeah, those are at noon Eastern on Thursday, June 20th and Thursday, June 27th. The reason our webinars are complimentary is because we've got sponsors that allow us to make these series complimentary. So we want to thank them, and please allow me to introduce them. So first, we want to thank our friends at GovEvents. That's the premier platform for posting events related to government contracting. You can find all of our webinars and our events on govevents.com, as well as our recordings from our past 650 plus webinars. We want to thank Tom Johnson and his team at Set Aside Alert. That's the go-to publication for contracting opportunities for small, women-owned, veteran-owned, hub zone, and 8A firms. Visit Set Aside Alert for more information. The Fairfax Economic Development Authority has an online calendar of events and webinars, and we want to thank them for posting our events and webinars on their calendar. The Virginia PTAC is now the Virginia Apex Accelerator. They're over at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. They offer free one-on-one counseling to established government contracting firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. If you're interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore their services, review homework recommendations, register for live trainings, and find useful links to agencies and other self-directed learning. One-on-one counseling is limited to eligible client companies. Appointment requests are handled in the order they are received and based on counselor availability due to high demand. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on where your business is located. The Greater Reston Chamber of Commerce has a monthly government contracting council meeting, allows you to network with contracting peers, learn about upcoming events, opportunities, and also contribute to future programming. The meetings take place the fourth Tuesday of each month at 8:30 at the Greater Reston Chamber of Commerce. The next meeting will be on Tuesday, March 26th. If you've got questions, drop a note over to Alicia Field. Her email address is there at the bottom of your screen. BidSpeed. You want help winning government contracts? BidSpeed can help. Users can find bidding opportunities from federal, state, and local government. Additionally, you can search for teaming partners, incumbent point of contact, expiring contracts, compliance matrices, and also proposal templates. Create your login today at bidspeed.com. And BidSpeed is an official partner of the U.S. SBA 7J Management and Technical Assistance Program, which I understand that program is going through a name change, or maybe has already taken place. The FBC, the Federal Business Council, events are the ultimate engagement channel to bring government and industry together. 68% of government personnel report that they attend more than one event each year. FBC has worked with government and industry for 45 plus years to create gatherings where ideas are shared and to help government achieve its goals. This includes agency industry days, cybersecurity symposiums, tech expos, and offsite meetings. FBC provides full life cycle meeting planning and event management. With over 5,000 meetings under their belt, FBC has the experience, systems, and personnel to make your next event exceptional. Learn more at fbcinc.com. Last but not least, GovBrew. Please check out our friends over at GovBrew. GovBrew is the most read government contracting newsletter, keeping thousands of government contracting professionals in the loop with news, updates, and opportunities in the federal contracting market, all in a fun and accessible email that only takes 5 minutes to read. It's 100% free to join. The newsletter goes out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m. sharp. It's filled with great content, event postings, webinars, and more. We encourage you to sign up at govbrew.co, or you can use the QR code you see on the screen. Okay, the reason we are here today is to actually cover the FAR, part 15. Again, we're going sequentially. So on Wednesday, we covered 14. Today, we're on 15. As I mentioned, Carrie Palmetier is our speaker. We are lucky to have her. I'm going to actually be quiet. And Carrie, I will turn the floor over to you. Just let me know when you're ready for your next slide. And thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, Jennifer. Looking forward to this too. So my name is Carrie Palmetier. I am a solo lawyer in Colorado and a former government and in-house on a major defense contractor. I've been doing government contracts now for 25 years, and my firm focuses on helping small businesses. And I can bring that experience from being in the government and at a defense contractor to helping the small businesses navigate the maze of government contracting. Like many of my clients, I am a woman-owned small business and service-disabled veteran-owned small business, and basically I help with everything except for litigation. So looking forward to this. Great refresher on the FAR exactly, because sometimes we forget to actually open up the book and go read it again. So you can go to the next slide, Jennifer. Okay, so what is FAR Part 15? Contracting by negotiation. It's kind of easier to define by what it's not. You've had the last two sessions on FAR Part 13, which is simplified acquisitions, micro purchase, and on FAR Part 14, which is invitation for bid. So FAR Part 15 is everything but those two. So it's any contract where an awardee is going to be selected on a trade-off basis, or if the terms are going to be negotiated, and that includes a sole source. It also means, and you'll see some overlap with FAR Part 12, because FAR Part 12 just says what the rules are for how to contract for commercial and how to purchase commercial products and services. But a lot of the times the process will follow the FAR Part 15 process to do a trade-off or to do a negotiation. So it sets up the process for how the government negotiates contracts to some degree, to a large degree. The FAR will be your primary source. And in this 1 hour, FAR Part 15, well, less than an hour, we're not going to cover everything in detail. It's going to be a very quick overview. And I would say that you can easily go back onto those 600 other presentations that Jennifer mentioned to get some more details, especially on proposal writing, debriefing processes, and proposal and cost and proposals. Sorry, cost and pricing. So next slide, please. Okay, so what is it? The source selection process is the first thing we're going to look at. And at this time, anytime this sets up the time frame for when the government and industry can talk. And there is a process now where everybody thinks, well, we can't talk to the industry or the industry can't talk to the government. And that's absolutely not true. The FAR explicitly says it's not true. Anytime prior to the receipt of proposals, not only is the government allowed to talk with contractors, it's encouraged. It even says, the FAR explicitly says, it's encouraged to talk to contractors. And the purpose of it is to improve the understanding of the requirements and the industry capabilities and enhance the ability to obtain good quality supplies and services. So discussions are absolutely a good thing. And go talking to the customer, and the customer should be willing to talk to you. Prior to the release of a solicitation, the industry may engage with any government personnel, whether it's not just contracting officers, but the technical team or the colonels and the generals or whoever in your program. You're allowed to go talk to anybody in the government. Now, it does start to, as the source selection process moves along, it will, the rules do get more and more difficult. So once a solicitation is posted, then the Procurement Integrity Act kicks in, and that you should have covered in FAR Part 3, and all communications must pass through the contracting officer. And that's where you will see those Q&As on your bid, on the Fed Biz Ops, and things where the government posts all of the questions and all of the answers, does the formal updates, and ensures fairness in the evaluation process. Then once proposals have been submitted, and we're going to go into more detail as to what these communications will look like, then it's a very rigid communication platform. But I do want to emphasize that prior to the release of solicitations, discussions are allowed. Government should be talking to you, and you should be able to go and talk to the government. Solicitations. When the government now goes to create a solicitation, that solicitation has certain things that it must be in there. And a solicitation can be a request for proposals, a request for quotes, you know, a BAA, anything out there. There's all sorts of acronyms for different types of solicitations. But basically, you're soliciting a response from the contractors. It must set forth the requirements, the anticipated terms and conditions, the information that's going to be required in the proposals, the factors for evaluation, and whether they will allow for any oral presentations. It also has to state whether certified cost and pricing data will be required, or if you can request an exception to it. We're going to spend a lot of time on cost and pricing data, so we'll spend some more, you know, we're going to skip through that and go through to the next slide, please. Okay, so there are two basic types of evaluations and negotiations in FAR Part 15. One is used more and more often now, but still fairly rare, and that's called an LTAP, lowest technically acceptable price. And what this basically says is, hey, everybody is a pass-fail on the technical capability, and then it's awarded to the lowest price. So they do a short technical assessment. If whoever has passed the technical, then whoever has the lowest price of a technically acceptable proposal will receive the award. They're not allowed for certain procurements, and that those rules differ for the civilian and the DoD, so I didn't list them. And you can't do a trade-off. So you can't trade price and technical capability. It is pass-fail on technical and then awarded on price. Okay, then your other one is the most commonly used, and that's called a best value trade-off. And what that means is that the solicitation will set forth, it'll say what the basis of the best value will be. Price must be evaluated. It cannot be ignored. Past performance is generally required to be evaluated. And then the rest of it can be up to that specific solicitation and the requirements for that scope, depending upon the complexity of the program. It can include technical solutions, technical excellence, management, personnel qualifications, etc. Whole host of factors can be evaluated. And then unless the solicitation is set aside for small businesses only, so then if it's large businesses are allowed and you have small business subcontracting plans, then the large business's history of a small business of complying with the small business subcontracting plan must also be evaluated. And I'm going to make a slight note here. Anything that's capitalized, there is a definition in the backup slides that you will be able to access afterward. The government has very broad discretion in selecting the type and weight of criteria. So this is a lot of the trade-offs, and I'm going to go back to the previous slide where we said discussions can happen before you can start talking with the government before the solicitation is issued, that's when you can influence the factors and the criteria and the weight of those criteria and help the government try to shape the solicitation. And that's all legal. Next slide. Okay, the proposals, when you start to draft your proposal, this is the hard part, and this is an art. You must include your non-technical capabilities and the price. I'm sorry, your non-price activity, like your technical, your past performance, and your price. Your non-price part of the proposal, so your technical, your past performance, your management, any of those non-price pieces, the burden is on you to fully articulate how you'll accomplish those solicitation requirements. Do not just restate the solicitation. There have been numerous cases on this. You will lose. And do not assume that the government will know everything just because they know you. Even if they've been, if you're the incumbent and you've been working with them for 3 or 4 years, or you've been working with them on a different contract and they know you, you cannot assume that the evaluation team will have that in their hands when they do the evaluation. If it's not in your proposal, they can't consider it. It has to be in your proposal. And then you have to comply with the formatting, structure, and solicitation requirements. Do not, mess around with the margins and the font size or anything else. Stick to it, comply with it. If you're not in compliance, excess pages will be dropped. Next slide. Now on the pricing, this is one of the harder parts of FAR Part 15. The prime contractor and all applicable subcontractors must provide some type of cost and pricing data. It may be certified, and we'll talk about when that applies, and it may be other than certified. We have to provide all of that information, a sufficient quantity, so that the contracting officer can determine that the contract price is fair and reasonable. That determination has to be made in all of the FAR Part 15 negotiated, competed type contracts. If an offeror cannot provide the data or refuses to provide the data, it is ineligible to receive a contract unless the agency head of the contracting activity determines that the award is in the government's best interest. Those will be scrutinized. So basically, if you want to compete for government contracts, you have to be willing and able to provide a certain level of cost and pricing data so that the government can make these determinations. Cost and pricing data, what is it? It is facts. It is not your judgment or your opinion. It's all elements of cost. It's all of your proposals and quotations for your subcontractors, because if you go out and you compete the work and you get 3 quotes in from 3 different subcontractors and you do a best value trade-off and you pick one, you still have to provide the information on the others. You don't have to provide a copy of them, but you have to provide the information on it so the government understands what your determination was, so that how you reached your price. All of this information has to be provided, and it has to disclose your profit or fee margin. I know that's very sensitive, and a lot of times the companies don't like to do that. It doesn't matter. You have to disclose profit or fee, and you're going to have to disclose all of your overhead and G&A rates, and that includes for any parent companies. Next slide. Okay, so certification of cost and pricing data. It's prohibited if you are below the simplified acquisition threshold, which is currently 250,000. It's exempted if there is adequate price competition. So 2 or more independent offers, award on a best value with price as a substantial factor, and the successful offeror's price is not unreasonable. If those criteria are met, no certification. It's exempt. Prices when they're set by law or regulation, this is rare. It's like utilities and things like that, where the federal or state governments are mandating the amount that a company can charge. And then for commercial products or services, so your FAR Part 12 procurements. Once that determination has been made that the product or service meets the definition, then it is a commercial, it's exempt. And sorry, the waiver should be a sub-bullet out, and those are waivers. You can also get a waiver for certification of cost and pricing data, but I think I may have seen one in my career so far, so those are very rare. Next slide. Okay, so if you are providing cost and pricing data that's not certified, then the contracting officers are only to request the type and quantity necessary to make the determination, not more. They can use data available from other government resources, other contracts, other proposals, other sources, anything that they have. They can request additional data that's not certified so that they can make that determination. I say that because it especially happens if there is a sole source situation, or if a commercial product or service has not been actually sold on the commercial market and has only been offered for sale. They're going to get into a lot of the data that may not be certified, but it's still going to fit within a level of detail that's closer to the certification levels. Certified, when does this happen? It means when you make that certification, it is a formal certification. That means that it's kicking into the various fault certification statutes, etc. So you have to take it seriously. And what you are saying is that all of the data that you have provided to the government were current, accurate, and complete. That means up to date, absolutely accurate, not mistakes, and that you provided all of the information, for example, like I explained about the subcontract proposals. Certification is required if the initial contract value is over $2 million, and then even if it was adequately competed, any modification that's over $750,000 will be certified. There is a specific format for that certification, and it must be signed by the offerors and each applicable subcontractor. If the price was not negotiated, so you submitted the proposal and the government accepted your price, then it would be signed as of the date of the proposal submission. If there is a negotiation, then once you reach a price agreement, you and your subcontractors have to go back, update all of that cost and pricing data, resubmit everything so that it's now current, accurate, and complete, and you sign based upon that price agreement. Yes, that may take time. Next slide. Okay, so when can you change your proposal and when can you withdraw it? Submission of proposals. You must submit on time. Late is late, and there are numerous cases that say that if you are late, your proposal does not have to be considered. A couple minor exemptions. One is if you get it into the government electronic system with enough time, and the government system has accepted it and has taken too long to get it to the contracting officer's desk. That's going to be one exemption. It is rare. Or if you are providing a proposal that has more favorable terms than any of your competitors, that's going to have to be difficult too on a best value, because then you have to be able to exceed your competitors on all of the evaluation criteria and price. The contracting officer must notify you if they receive the proposal late and whether your proposal will still be considered. Keep in mind, if they accept a late proposal, they are still subject to protest by the other offerors whose proposals were submitted on time. So it is a fairly strict standard. Plan to submit your proposal well in advance of the deadline. Proposal modifications. You can revise your proposal before the closing date and on time. So if you submitted 3 days earlier and you realize you made a mistake, you can submit a revision up until that proposal deadline time. If the government amends the solicitation, you can submit your proposal, you can change your proposal to accommodate that amendment. Making other changes to it, not necessarily, but usually just that amendment. And you can correct a mistake before award. So if you're in the negotiations, or if you've submitted your proposal and it's in the evaluation process and somebody's going through and they went, oh my God, we forgot a decimal, or we forgot to add a factor or a whole element of cost. These things happen. You can submit a revision to the proposal noting the mistake. You can withdraw your proposal before award, but if you withdraw your proposal, you will not be allowed to correct or resubmit it. You can only modify it as above. Next slide. Okay, the contracting officer is responsible for the evaluation. You've probably already learned so far if you've been listening to these presentations. how important your contracting officer is. Your contracting officer is the most important person on any procurement. They are responsible for everything. They can just bring in other experts. They can bring in their users, the program people. They can bring in a finance person, a lawyer, or anybody else. But the contracting officer is in charge. When they do the evaluation, they must assess the relative qualities of those criteria to determine the ability to perform successfully. Past performance is one of the main ones. It is an indicator of the ability to perform. Usually what they want are performance within the last 3 years, maybe 5, and relevancy, so similar scope and complexity. So if you've been doing a contract that's at $1 million and now you're competing for a contract that's $10 million, that $1 million contract is not going to be as relevant as somebody else who's been performing $15 million or even $8 million contracts. Similar scopes of work, etc. So that currency and relevancy. And then if you have past performance in the CPARS ratings that is less than satisfactory or less, your response is to that. So when you get to that part of the FAR presentation, pay attention to how to respond to negative past performance. If you don't have a history, you've been a subcontractor, or you have commercial activity, but you don't have anything that's going to be considered past performance that's current or relevant, it's neutral. It doesn't have to be positive, but it can't be negative. They may just say neutral. Read the solicitation for how a lack of past performance will be considered. Your predecessors, your key personnel, subcontractors, major critical subcontractors, many times their past performance will be considered too. Read the solicitation. And again, if you are a large business and you're going to have a small business subcontracting plan, your history to comply with that small business subcontracting plan. With past performance only, I said it before with other information, but with past performance, they may consider information that's within their knowledge base or talking with the contracting officers on the past performance of other contracts. They can go look in your CPARS history. They can look at your past awards. That is the one area where they are allowed to go beyond the proposal to pull in additional information. For technical, they're going to look to see whether you can accomplish the technical requirements and whether you understand the complete statement of work. And that is why you do not just restate the solicitation. You have to say how you're going to accomplish the solicitation requirements so that you can demonstrate you understand the work requirement, the full work scope. Next slide. Cost or price. Okay, so the bigger the contract, the more important this is. The government must purchase supplies and services from responsible sources at a fair and reasonable price. How do you evaluate price? There's numerous techniques. Primarily, you're going to understand that there is a price analysis, and this is the process to examine and evaluate whether the price is overall fair and reasonable. It is not, a price analysis is not an evaluation of individual cost elements. The government does look at individual cost elements, but in the end, you can have one cost element that may be too high and another one that's too low. Profit can be high or low or whatever. In the end, the government has to determine if the overall price is fair and reasonable. It's required unless there's a cost analysis, which we'll talk about. And there's various techniques for how to do it. Comparison to other proposals, parametric estimating, value analyses. That's why the contracting officer will often bring in finance individuals, experts to help with evaluation. If there's a commercial product and service under the FAR Part 12 process that's being bought without adequate competition, i.e. sole source, the government can request information other than certified cost and pricing data, which would get them into a lot of the same level of detail for the certified cost and pricing data, so that they can still do this price analysis and make sure that what they're paying for is a fair and reasonable price. So this is a tension in the commercial world. Next slide. Cost analysis. This is the review and evaluation of the separate cost elements and the profit to determine fair and reasonable price. And when I say this, I mean even in your overhead rates, they're going to be looking at how much you're paying for insurance and benefits for your employees. It means separate cost elements. For the large companies, those elements are evaluated on a regular basis as part of their overall system. But for those companies who are new to this or don't have a disclosure statement or any of those kinds of audited costs, it may feel very intrusive. It is. And it has to be done with each of your subcontractors too. So that means you as the prime either need to be evaluating those subcontractors, or if the subcontractor requests that the information go direct to the government, it could take some long time before all of the audits are complete. It must be used for cost reimbursement contracts and when certified data is required. So cost analysis is required for all cost reimbursement contracts regardless of dollar value and whenever certified cost and pricing data is required. It includes verification of the data and evaluation of their current practices, comparison with historical incurred cost, verification of the cost, whether they're complying with the cost principles. In other words, do you have any unallowable costs in your separate cost elements? And then, so that gets very detailed. This is what takes a lot of the time in the proposal process, evaluation process. Cost realism is the process of reviewing and evaluating to see that your price and your technical combined together reflect an understanding of the elements. In other words, you're not so underpriced that you're not going to be able to perform, or so overpriced that you think that you don't understand the requirements, because obviously you're spending too much time and effort to accomplish something that doesn't need to be done. So that's what they're going to be using the cost realism for. So those are your basic techniques: price analysis, cost analysis, and cost realism. Read the solicitation in advance to see what's going to apply. Next slide. Excessive pass-through charges. This is a big issue. It comes up a lot, but it actually has limited applicability. It only applies if you're going to the prime contractor will subcontract more than 70% of the work. Now, if you are in that mode and you are going to subcontract more than 70% of the work, then first the government's supposed to determine this in the market research phase, and then determine whether the government would be better off breaking the contract requirements apart and buying things more directly, so that they're not paying for the levels of price add-on between different tiers of government subcontracts. If the government decides to continue and you're going to subcontract more than 70%, they're going to limit the amount of fee you can recover on subcontractor cost. And that's because the government doesn't want to pay fee on top of the subcontract fee. So if you have 4 tiers of subcontractors and every tier puts fee on top of fee, it's a lot of excess profit is what the government looks at. And that's why it's called excessive pass-through charges. Subcontractors, you've heard me mention it already. The price determination will include subcontract cost. The prime in each tiers have to conduct a cost or price analysis. So basically the rules we've talked about as to whether certified cost or pricing data is required and the type of analysis to be done, the primes and each subsequent tier have to do that same analysis with each applicable subcontract. And all the way down the chain, each subcontractor will have to provide the certification if none of the exemptions apply and the contract is more than $2 million. Somebody had asked a question in advance of the presentation. There is no exemption to any of this for small businesses. These rules apply to all contractors. Subcontractors, prime contractors prefer to be able to just do the cost and price analysis themselves, especially the large companies, because they have the resources and it's quicker. Subcontractors, reasonably so, don't want to provide their proprietary financial data to their competitors. So contractors at each tier may request that the proprietary financial data be provided directly to the government. If you are a subcontractor, that is your right. You can make that request. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to get into something that's very controversial. Profit is not bad. We hear about profit being a negative with contractors because companies are profit motivated. But the FAR recognizes that profit is a very valid part of a company's operations. And I provided these quotes to you directly from the FAR. It is in the government's best interest to offer contractors the opportunities for financial rewards, attract the best capabilities, maintain a viable industrial base. The one I love and I've used often in negotiations is negotiations aimed merely at reducing prices by reducing profit without proper recognition of the function of profit are not in the government's interest. And this happens a lot. And I have used this quote back of, you're only negotiating to reduce our profit for purposes of trying to reduce the price. That's not acceptable. Profit is good. Profit is why companies exist. Also, the one I love is that unless a cost analysis is being performed, so cost reimbursement contract or over the or certified cost and pricing data, they're not even required to negotiate profit. So profit is good. The government loves to throw out that profit has to be capped at some percentage. That's only true in 3 situations. One is a cost plus fixed fee for R&D. It's capped at 15% of the contractor's estimated cost, not the government's estimated cost. Architect and engineering contracts, so we'll skip those. And then cost plus fixed fee contracts in general, the fee shall not exceed 10%. So it's 10% for cost plus fixed fee contracts, except for R&D can go up to 15%. Any other type of contract, there is no cap on profit. It's a negotiation. Any other cap is a matter of the government policy and trying to protect the taxpayers, recognizing that they're spending taxpayer dollars and staying within budget, but it is not a statutory or regulatory cap imposed. Sole source awards will be negotiated more because there is a sense that the government, that the sole source contractor can gouge the government with getting more money. So they will be, the price and profit on sole source awards will be negotiated more heavily. Next slide. Now the government, yeah, you do have to keep in mind, getting off my soapbox, the government's contracting officer is there to protect the public fisc, the taxpayer dollars, its overall budget. They're trying to make sure that the government spends a reasonable amount of money to obtain the products and services that is fair and reasonable. But they still have to balance that with providing you the greatest incentive for efficient and economical performance. So if you're going to be harmed and operating at too low a percentage where you still are eking out the barest minimum of profit, you're at risk for defaulting. That's not in the government's interest. So the government has to find that sweet spot in between. And I'll stay off my soapbox. Okay, before they get into the negotiations, the contracting officer has to establish its pre-negotiation objectives. This is going to be done internally within the government. They have to complete it and document it before they can start negotiations. A lot of the times that can take, depending upon the source selection, that can take some time, but that's part of the process. And they establish the government's initial negotiation position and then where the ultimate goals are. So it sets up the boundaries for the contracting officer. So yes, the contracting officer is in charge, but the contracting officer is also acting at direction of its government personnel, the other government people. And now we're going to get into some of the fun parts. The contracting officer may elect not to engage with offerors, have limited exchanges, discussions, but we're going to talk about those processes real quick. And then depending upon the number of offerors, set up a competitive range and then document all the negotiations. So that's the process we're going to walk through real quick. Next slide. They can award without discussions. So they can just accept your offer, sign your proposal, and you are good to go. They can engage in clarifications. So the difference of clarifications versus discussions, and that's why these words are capitalized. Clarifications are there to clarify certain aspects of the proposals, but not allow proposal revisions. This happens before establishment of a competitive range, or if they are just if there's only 2 or 3 offers, just accept whichever offer they want. There's no proposal revisions with clarifications. If there is a competitive range, you can have the clarifications, you can have some exchanges as necessary to establish that competitive range. Past performance issues, things that aren't clarified where you would never had an opportunity to respond to your past performance. And if your if they're not sure if they're going to include you in the competitive range, if you're on the edge, they can engage in these limited exchanges, clarifications with you. If you have had the adverse past performance, not satisfactory, adverse, then, and you have not had an opportunity to respond because it's just got entered into CPARs or it hasn't been put into the CPARs yet, or it wasn't required to be put into CPARs, then, and it's not in your proposal, then they have to raise it with you. This time, it is only to understand and obtain a better interpretation of your proposal. It is not to allow for proposal revisions. Next slide. Competitive range, this is narrowing it down. So if they're going to expect to get 10, 20 offers, they narrow it down to 3, 5, some number, so that the government's really only evaluating a small number of proposals. It's just more efficient. If they open up discussions during this phase, so they come in and start asking for specific questions where they're going to allow for you to make changes. The discussions must be fair and tailored for each proposal. They don't have to discuss everything, but they have to point you in enough direction so that you can know where you have a significant weakness or deficiency in adverse past performance. Next slide. And I'm talking really fast because I'm watching the clock. Proposal revisions. If they've opened up the competitive range and have had discussions, you must be allowed to update your proposal. Any decision, the source selection authority is most likely going to be your contracting officer, but for major source selections, it may be somebody else. It has to be documented, and it has to be document the trade-off, why criteria were traded off against each other. The source selection authority must make their own decision. They can assess input from others, but their decision must be their decision. Next slide.
Carrie, I was going to say, please take your time. You don't need to finish.
Okay, you told me it was going to be a hard stop at 10:45, so I was talking fast. Okay.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, the documentation is key. It's got to be narrative. Document that decision. It doesn't need to quantify precisely and say a 10% here or 1% there or anything else. It just needs to say that this technical capability is going to bring such a big advantage to the government that the additional price is in the government's interest. But it must make that determination. Next slide. Okay, so unsuccessful offerors. There is a notification process, so you're not supposed to be left in the dark during the evaluation process. Once you have been eliminated from the competition, you must be notified. If you're being eliminated before award, whether it is your proposal was non-responsive, or you were found not to be responsible, or you didn't make the cut into the competitive range, you must be notified promptly and in writing. The notification must state the basis for that determination and tell you that no proposal revision will be allowed. If you are excluded from the competitor, basically if you don't win, so it happens post-award, then 3 days after the date of the award. So what this means is that the government makes a determination as to who will receive the contract, awards that contract, and then within 3 days notifies all of the other unsuccessful offerors, and it must contain more detail. So at that stage in the post-award, the notification must state the number of offerors solicited, the number of proposals received, the name and address of the awardees if there's more than one, and then the items, quantities, unit prices of each award. This is going to get into a little bit of tension because unit prices can be released if it's public, but they also can't violate the Trade Secrets Act, which limits the level of detail of some unit prices. So that will be negotiated to some degree, but they have to provide you as much information as they can on the price. They may list the total contract price, again, if the unit prices are proprietary. And in general terms, they have to note why your proposal was not selected. It was not the most technical evaluation. It was the highest price. Something that says why you were not selected. Next slide. Now, for contracts that were set aside for small businesses, so only small businesses are allowed to compete. Then slight timing difference. After negotiations, but before award. So you remember the previous one was 3 days after award. This notification has to happen before award. Must notify all of the unsuccessful offerors, hey, no response required, you don't need to respond to us, but it gives them the opportunity to challenge the size of the apparent awardee. So they have to provide, you have to be notified of the name of the potential awardee, name and address, and that's why the notification has to happen before award, is so that the size can be challenged. Now, the contracting officer is not required to provide this notice if the scope necessitates awards for some reason without delay, or if it's been accepted into the 8A program. But just keep in mind, if you are in a small business set aside and you get that notification after negotiations, and you want to challenge the size of the awardee, you have a very short window there. Successful offerors. So they do also have to notify successful offerors. Most of the time you get the very happy letter that says, or they'll unilaterally execute the contract to send it back for signature because there were no negotiations or they accepted your final proposal. Alternatively, they can send you an email or notice that says, hey, you've been selected. We're in the process of finishing up the paperwork. We'll get it to you. But they do have to formally notify you. Next slide. Debriefings. Okay. Debriefings, this is one of your key things as a contractor, because this is your feedback. This tells you why you lost or why you won. So these are important. They happen upon exclusion from the competition, so pre-award, or after the selection of awardee, a post-award. So there's 2 times where debriefings will happen. Debriefings can be oral, written, or other method. It may be a short 1 paragraph that they send to everybody. It does not have to be a formal PowerPoint presentation with a whole bunch of details, but they do have to provide a debriefing. The contracting officers must retain in their contract files a summary of each debriefing. So one of the things about debriefings is, as I said, they can do a short email, but when they also have to tell you why you weren't selected, those are going to have to be tailored. So pre-award, once you receive that notice that you've been excluded from the competition, you have 3 days to request a debriefing in writing. Not picking up the phone. You can pick up the phone, but you have to follow it up in writing. You must request a debriefing in writing within 3 days. Not 3 business days, 3 days. Once you make that request, timing starts. The contracting officer has to provide the debriefing as soon as practicable. The debriefing in a pre-award state is limited to the evaluation of the significant elements of your proposal and the rationale for eliminating you from the competition, and then answering reasonable, relevant questions. That's it. They can't tell you about the awardee's proposal. They can't tell you any trade-off. They can't tell you anything else because the evaluation is still happening. We'll talk about the notices for protest, but this will trigger your protest timeline. If you request it timely, so if you've put in the request for the debriefing within 3 days, you may request not to receive a pre-award debriefing, but to receive a post-award debriefing. This is a trade-off for you because the post-award debriefing will give you more information, but you've most probably lost the ability to protest it because you waited more than a certain number of days because you felt the decision is made. Not absolute, but most likely. I'm sure there's lots of lawyers who like to pick up lots of protest. You can only have one debriefing, so you can't have a pre-award and a post-award. It's one or the other. Next slide. Post-award. Again, 3 days of the receipt of the notice, you can request a debriefing in writing. If you are not timely, no debriefing is required. The government may choose to do so, but it does not extend the protest deadlines. So that's very important to make sure that you have somebody monitoring your emails to make sure you make these requests in time. If you requested a debriefing in a timely manner, then they should occur within 5 days of receipt of that request. I say should because sometimes if there's 5 or 6 companies and they have to do multiple debriefings or they have to put together slides, etc., it could take more than 5 days for them to put it together. The post-award debriefing, it's going to have some of the same things. The first 3 are the same things from the pre-award, but what it then also does is the number and identity of all of the offerors And it may not include the ranking or the content of all of the proposals or evaluate you and compare you on a point by point. And it can't tell you the names of the individuals who provided past performance evaluation or anything prohibited by FOIA. But you're going to get a more detailed rationale for why you were eliminated. What are your elements? Where did you not do as well as the awardee? And you'll get the awardee's price and the awardee's information. Next slide. Because it was also in the notification. Okay, so those are your debriefings. So now we're going to go into one of the negative parts of FAR Part 15. Mention certified cost and pricing data. The term for the serious consequence is defective pricing. So basically, if any of your certification at any tier of the cost and pricing data is found to be inaccurate, incomplete, or not current, it's going to open up what's called a defective pricing. I moved it here in the presentation because this can occur during the proposal stage, and it can also occur at any time during contract administration, even into termination after completion. If it's discovered pre-award, if you discover it, you must immediately disclose that you had a defective price in your proposal, that something you put in your proposal was not accurate, was not complete, was not current. If the government discovers it, then they have to disclose it to you. Then you have to negotiate an updated price. If it's discovered post-award, the government can refer it for an audit or investigation. They will be entitled to a price adjustment for any payments that have been made. Any overpayment associated with that defective pricing, any fees on that overpayment, interest on that overpayment, and penalties on that overpayment. You can offset if you understated data, but that will be harder for you, but you are allowed to offset. You're not going to be allowed to recover if you understate data and you should have been paid more somewhere during the contract performance and that's discovered, you're not going to get a recovery on that. The contracting officer may note any defective pricing, even if it's cured and fixed, in their past performance evaluation. So they can give you less than excellent past performance for defective pricing. That's one of the consequences. There's more serious consequences because if it's found out to be intentional, that you intentionally miscertified, then we start getting into some potential criminal or civil investigations too. But usually it's going to be handled through a defective pricing case. But again, this could be very unpleasant because you can have various agencies investigating it. You can have the different inspector generals investigating it. And your books will be opened, your subcontractor, if it happened at a subcontractor facility, et cetera. Next slide. Good. Summary. The negotiated contracts are complicated. There is a strict source selection process that must be followed. And that's because we want to make sure that the source selection remains fair and that all of the companies are competing on a fair basis. So we talked through those rules, especially about when you can communicate with the government anytime before a solicitation is dropped. Once your proposals are submitted, then you're going to follow the process for clarifications and discussions and proposal revisions. Certification of cost and pricing data is very serious and has consequences. If you are small and you are growing into that level where you are going to start having to certify cost and pricing data, make sure you have your consultants and experts on board to help you understand how to build your accounting systems and be able to provide that current, accurate, and complete information. The fact that you didn't know you had to go get the information does not mean it's complete. It's still incomplete. You have to be able to collect that information. The government must analyze price on every Part 15 negotiation. They have to do it either through a cost or price analysis and sometimes with a cost realism. Your price is going to have to comply with all of the elements of the FAR, and you'll have a big portion of that in the FAR Part 31 session. And then there is a formal process for the government to notify and debrief offerors. When you get to the FAR Part 33 presentation, which is your litigation disputes section, you will get the whole details of when you are allowed to protest, what the timelines are for protest, and how to go about doing a protest. So Jennifer, I think that's it. I stayed within the 1 hour, but I ran over the 10:45. or sorry, 1245.
All that was no, all good, all good. This was a lot of information, very important information, obviously for the government contractors. And do you want to speak here to your last
Oh
slide on
yeah, we can talk
definitions?
about the definition. So I put through a lot of these definitions in here, everybody. Best value, I pulled the definitions either straight out of the FAR, or to the extent that they don't have a definition in the FAR, then some variation that's as close as possible. You'll find when you go through them that best value just means what we've talked about, that it's a trade-off. What is the value? Not what is the lowest price, but what is the one that's going to get to the government the best technical for the best price. Clarifications occur before a competitive range is established, and it means that you can help the government understand your proposal, but you're not going to be allowed to change your proposal. Competitive range is simply just a reduction so that the government is only evaluating a reasonable number of proposals, and to the full level of detail, our proposal process, evaluation process already takes a very long time. Without a competitive range, we would struggle to get contracts awarded. Cost and pricing data, I will emphasize, of this FAR Part 15, cost and pricing as a whole, whether it's your proposal pricing, whether it's the evaluation process, the certification, the elements of the cost, one of the most complicated parts of the FAR as a whole. If you can take classes on that, if that's an area where you're going to have to learn, there are, Jennifer, we think she has a whole bunch of classes on it. Otherwise, that's an area where you're going to have to roll up your sleeves and dig in to start learning. Deficiency means this is when the government's evaluating and they find something that's a significant weakness. It doesn't mean every little typo mistake. It's not typos and mistakes. It's significant weaknesses, inability to perform, something that's going to increase the risk of the contractor's ability to perform. Those are deficiencies. Those have to be mentioned in a discussion. Next slide. Discussions, these are the more detailed, but after a clarification, they occur after the competitive range. If only 2 or 3 offers are submitted, then it can occur without a competitive range. But it's at that stage, the government competitive range will be the same number of proposals. But the thing with discussions versus clarification is that after a discussion, the purpose will be that the contractors will update their proposals. One of the finest acronyms in the government is FIPR, Final Proposal Revision. We love our acronyms. Excessive pass-through charge, we've talked about. Lowest technically acceptable price, we've talked about. Price means the total, your cost, all of your cost elements, indirect, direct, all of your costs, your expenses, plus any fee or profit. That is the total price on the contract. Solicitation is any document from the government that says, please submit an offer or a quote to us. It's the more generic term for RFP or other ones that you hear. Subcontract, this is a complicated definition. Generally speaking, it's going to be anybody who's doing the work required in the contract or charging time or supplies to that contract. They will be a subcontractor. They could be a vendor. Some companies have different terminology: purchase order, subcontracts, vendor contract quotes, etc. That terminology isn't what's relevant. What's relevant is if the supplies or services are going to be charged to the government through that contract, or if it is a required element of the prime contract. Trade-off goes with the best value. It's the process by which the different price and non-price factors are compared. And weakness, you have weaknesses and significant weaknesses and deficiencies. If it's a significant, so you can have a whole bunch of weaknesses, may or may not be raised to you in discussion. Significant weaknesses, it's going to appreciably increase the risk of an unsuccessful contract performance. And yes, if you haven't noticed, a lot of these definitions of evaluation trade-offs, the factors, the best value is very vague and amorphous, very imprecise. We went from having scores, 1 to 100 type scores, and everybody was scored against strict criteria. And that ended up being, believe it or not, that ended up being more complicated than a more generic, amorphous competition that allowed for more flexibility. So I actually like the current process, even with the vagueness in it. because I do think it ends up with, overall, there's always going to be exceptions, but overall, I think it ends up with better contracts. Next slide. I think that's it. There's my information. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm friendly most of the time, and I'm happy to answer questions on this seminar if you have any other follow-ups, because I know this was fast. Otherwise, look forward to meeting people, and hopefully you enjoyed it.
Great, Carrie, this was awesome. It was great information. I feel like it's one of probably the most important part of the FAR, or definitely in the top, I don't know, 3 or 5. It's all important, but you did a great job in the time covering all of these points, which is a tough task in itself. Your slides, I could tell you took a lot of time to put those together, so we appreciate that, as well as the time you took today to kind of walk through them and explain everything. If you guys have questions, and I know some people have typed some things in, please just grab Carrie's information now and contact her directly. She's great to work with, very knowledgeable. And yeah, again, thanks everybody for taking the time, and thanks Carrie for joining us. Again, today's webinar is being recorded, as all of our webinars are. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, it doesn't cost you anything, and you'll get the alert before you'll get the email when the video is uploaded. So hop over to YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave us a comment, like the video. But again, all questions related to this FAR part, please direct them to Carrie. We hope to see you next week for FAR part 16 and 17. And that's a wrap for today. So have a good weekend, everybody. And thanks again, Carrie.
Hi, Jennifer.